Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Toronto Sports Rush. We have live breaking news. I'm joined once again today by Mr. EJ Hradek, the lead analyst of the NHL Network. EJ, for the second time today, we have to talk Toronto Maple Leaf news. We have to talk. Shanahan is gone, and Brendan Shanahan, he himself issued a statement. I'm going to read from some of it before we
Okay.
begin. Following a meeting today, I was informed I was no longer going to remain as president and alternate governor of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I want to thank the board of MLSE for the tremendous support they have shown me over my tenure. He goes on from there to deliver glowing praise of the team. He thanks everyone for his time, their commitment, general glowing praise, and concludes, of course, with wanting to thank the fans for their passion and loyalty. From there, he goes on again. Love the team inspired me every day. Proud of the work they started doing in 2014. Ultimately came to win a Stanley Cup. They did not. Concludes it with the other members of the executive team he enjoyed working with and wishing everyone the best. Now, EJ, are you surprised that this move, him being shown the door, his contract not being renewed, came this soon after their meeting, this soon after we talked about it this morning?
No, not really, because I think this was kind of a done deal. I mean, I think a lot of Brendan's future in Toronto really depended upon how things were going to go in the postseason, and
Mm-hmm.
they needed a deep run. They needed maybe to go all the way to the Stanley Cup final for him to stay on there. So obviously, there had been the rumors. We discussed it, Kyle, the idea that perhaps he could end up leaving the Leafs, going to the New York Islanders. I guess that is kind of the next step now. Will he indeed? He's going to speak with the Islanders. Will he end up there? But for Brendan Shanahan, I mean, he came on board. I guess it's 11 years. I think to kind of look at the big picture, he did a lot of good things there. It was a complete rebuild. There was some pain early, some bad teams. They found a way to end up with some really high draft picks and had the first overall pick in a year when a player like Austin Matthews was available. They drafted Marner, they drafted Nylander, they drafted some other good young players along the way. I think
Mm-hmm.
so. There was a lot of positives. They were a very good team. They made the playoffs every year. I think they have the longest stretch of making the playoffs currently in the National Hockey League. But unfortunately, once there, they were not able to really do much damage, only getting to the second round on two occasions. So, for me, I think, when you look at the Shanahan era, there were positives, but the negative to me is I've said many times now is that I think his main mistake was the idea of going with inexperienced general manager and Kyle Dubas with in concert with an inexperienced head coach in Sheldon Keefe and keeping those guys in place for so long, trying to win in the playoffs with a formula that really has never proven to be successful before. I think the formula to win in the Stanley Cup playoffs is something that you can kind of figure out if you've been around a while. And Brendan Shanahan was part of Stanley Cup championship teams in Detroit. And, that's the thing that's a little bit baffling. The game does change, but there are certain elements that will never change in terms of the way we play the playoffs in this league and the way there are four rounds of playoffs and the necessary elements that one needs to be successful. And I don't think Kyle Dubas, as an inexperienced manager, really grasped that really until maybe the very end of his tenure. I think they've made strides under Brad Treliving and the new head coach Craig Berube. But really, when I think about Shanahan as the guy that is the architect behind all this, I would say the biggest negative was the idea that he would bring in an inexperienced manager who had never been at the helm of an NHL team before and had not worked for any other NHL team prior to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and
Yeah.
put him in charge of things, and then have a first-time NHL head coach in Sheldon Keefe and expect things to just work out and go well. So that's on him at the end of the day. And here we are 11 years later. He did a lot of good things, but in the end, the Leafs did not even make the conference finals in any of the years, even with some really high end players on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to speculate about all the moves that went wrong. It does seem, however, though, with all the talk that we had on these shows throughout this season about the fit with Berube in Toronto, how good a job Trey Living did. It's hard to say had they not brought in guys like that or those specific guys sooner. I mean, there's reasons they couldn't do that, but if they had those people in place, how far behind in the development of this team they are at this point because of the inexperience of the other two, because it really does filter downhill. It trickles
Yeah.
downhill, the effect throughout the team. But I mean, you tried something, and it's not like, again, like you said, there's I hope this isn't an excuse for the fan base to completely sell him down the creek, because they do have a good active playoff streak, and he's not
Yes.
solely responsible for the on ice performance. He's solely responsible, as you say, for the architecture. And at some point, these people move on. They move on to new jobs, and
Yeah.
they move on to new experiences with new teams, because there's a shelf life for this sort of thing. And it appears as though, and leading up to today, we all saw this coming. You saw it coming in advance, and now the moment is here, and the Leafs have to decide to move forward, and they haven't even gotten to the players yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as I say, for Brendan Shanahan, he will now be talking to the New York Islanders. Perhaps he goes to the Islanders. We will see what he decides to do. There will be those who say, what did Brendan Shanahan, what did he really win in his time with Toronto? Well, in the end, he didn't win the Stanley Cup, so that's all that matters. They didn't have a lot of playoff success. I think when you look back on those runs, 2021 is particularly disappointing. The year they were in the pods, where they had a 3-1 lead over the Montreal Canadiens and
Mhm.
couldn't finish them off. In fairness, they lost John Tavares in game one of that series, but still they were up 3-1. They should have finished off a team that they were on paper at least better than, didn't do it. Some of the moves that they made over these years, again, didn't work out as they had hoped. And, only more recently have they tried to go to a more tried and true um, roster design of what it takes to be successful in the postseason by
Yeah.
adding some bigger defensemen and some grit around the edges of a very skilled group of 4 or 5 guys that lead the roster.
Yeah, we're seeing, and the sentiment that I just echoed, and the words coming out of your mouth right now are being echoed by the online chatter right now on the YouTube channel. It's not a hard feeling situation. It's just, it was time. It was time
Times.
for teams to move on. And you almost wonder, like, there's a press conference tomorrow at 1 p.m. Keith Pelly will be discussing this decision, be discussing it. And I don't think, there's not a rush, I'm guessing, to get someone new in this particular role right away, because the other architects are all still in place. They have the pieces in place. They'll move on to the players next, probably. And I'm not aware of any speculation of who would replace Brendan, but it does seem like this might be the first move high up the corporate ladder to someone said enough is enough. It's time for some serious culture and regime change in Toronto. Is this the first axe to fall of several?
Well, I mean, certainly it's the first, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know if they're necessarily going to replace Brendan Shanahan with someone along those lines. I mean, Brad Treliving is someone that's capable of being the general manager. He was the general manager in Calgary. He's been the general manager in Toronto for a couple of years. Perhaps they might want to add another piece to that upper management puzzle, but I don't think
Mhm.
it's necessarily urgent. They have a pretty robust
Yeah.
management team there in Toronto. It's one thing they've really built that out, which is it's funny because the New York Islanders do not have that. Lou Lamoriello has got kind of a bare bones operation there, so to speak. Lou is kind of the guy that does a lot of things, and it's not the case in Toronto. So it'll
No.
be interesting to hear what Keith Pelly has to say tomorrow. Obviously, we get to the players. You have to, the Marner situation. Have made some phone calls this afternoon, and there are teams that are gonna be willing to spend a lot of money to try to persuade Mitch Marner to come via free agency. So he's going to have a number of suitors. In fact, I was told by one source today that Utah may be willing to spend over $100 million to try to woo Mitch Marner to come there. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that's how it's going to play out. Certainly there'll be interest. I don't know if there will be a conversation still with the Toronto Maple Leafs or not. It's hard to lose really high end players and get nothing in return. Again, I go back to a tie with the Islanders, right? John Tavares left Toronto, came to the Islanders. The Islanders got
Yeah.
nothing in return for that. You get cap space, but you don't get anything else in terms of assets, which obviously, if the Leafs had decided to trade Marner a couple of years ago, they could have gotten probably many assets for him.
Mhm.
So we'll have to see what happens there. They have to get Matthew Nyes taken care of. I think that's important. So I guess first step is to listen to Keith Pelley speak tomorrow and see if there's any other changes to that upper management group in terms of adding or maybe replacing Shanahan with
Right.
someone else. But I think Brad Treliving and that group that's currently there will probably be running the ship now, at least for the near future.
Yeah, and as you suggest, it's unlike some other teams, they do have such a solid support structure everywhere. The need to replace him immediately probably isn't there. And I mean, the personnel decisions they make, the group of people that is going to be largely responsible for making those decisions remains in place. So they're looking forward. I don't expect them to pursue someone new for this role. And if they get someone new, they may have slightly less responsibility, perhaps even. And some of that will fall to the other people, or they'll just kind of coast as is. It's hard to say, it's hard to speculate. But this does feel like the start of a regime change, and perhaps Johnny Tavares will head back to Long Island, and finish off where he started, something like that, with some familiarity. He's going to be another person that the fit for him on the right team. But as we said this morning in the show, that's mostly a numbers game for the Leafs. If the numbers make sense, they may want to keep him around
Yeah.
and pursue some other people with the money they may end up saving on not spending on Mitch
Yeah,
Marner. But this is all
it's funny
speculation.
as Kyle, as we talk about, the Shanahan situation today, it does seem like the end of an era. And you have to go back. Brendan Shanahan is a Hall of Famer. He was
Mhm.
a great player. He is someone that grew up in the Toronto area. He never played for the Leafs, but this is a guy who had a great career. He scored over 600 goals. He came there with the hopes of bringing a Stanley Cup to Toronto, ending that long drought.
Yeah.
And again, I say he was able at the start, I think, to do a lot of things that needed to be done because they needed to have kind of a total rebuild. And he was willing to do that. And he brought in a coach at the time in Mike Babcock, he was the top coaching candidate out there on the market at the time, and he paid him accordingly. And unfortunately, there was a number of circumstances over the years that we've seen that have played out that when you look at Mike Babcock now and you look at him then, it's obviously two different pictures, right? So,
Yeah.
it ended up when he brought in Kyle Dubas, it was apparent Dubas wanted to bring in Sheldon Keefe. Babcock was out. So again, talking to managers, talking to some really experienced managers around the league and guys that know Brendan Shanahan really well, they share the same kind of confused feeling as I had is that, this is a guy who really understood what it took, has a part of multiple cup winners in Detroit. And for him to go down a path with an inexperienced manager, first time manager in Toronto, which, that is, one of the top handful of franchises in this league, and certainly a franchise that is scrutinized minute by minute, as we prove right here.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the thing that people shake their head about is that, like, why wouldn't he have stayed with Lamarillo or brought in another experienced manager and stay with a more experienced coaching staff? It's not like I'm saying there are good first time coaches, there are good first time managers, but normally those things don't happen in major markets
Yeah.
with
That's
with very, very big teams that have certainly a lot to overcome to try to get to win a Stanley Cup for the first time in since 1967. So
mhm.
that's the thing when I think of the Shanahan era and moving forward. That's the one thing that will it's just kind of, I shake my head, is that if he had gone down a different path that way, a more traditional path, and one in which he was familiar, maybe things would have shaken out differently. I don't think, Marner and Nylander, as I mentioned to you earlier, Kyle, when I watched them make mistakes in the playoffs this year, key moments, defensive mistakes, I'm like, these are things that should have been corrected years ago, and they were not for whatever reason. And I think there was a group of players there that had a chance to maybe do something special over these last several years. And I think, unfortunately, that opportunity may have been wasted.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. But again, I mean, there's a lot of speculation. Do you think this will impact in any way people choosing to stay with the team at this point, or free agents coming into the team potentially, or is that his position? He's a big name. You like to go where winners have been, or past winners are. But I would that affect people's decision to stay or go or come into town?
I don't really think so. At the end of the day, I
Yeah.
think, people are, a lot of these guys are still under contract, right? So they're not
Hmm.
going anywhere.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see what Keith Pelly says tomorrow. What's the thinking of Brad Treliving? Does he want to make some really bold moves? Does he want to maybe think about what is the market for Austin Matthews? I don't think he wants to go down that path, but maybe he wants to at least, hey, what would someone give me for this guy? He's under contract for another couple of years. Nylander's under contract. They've got to take care of the Nye situation. They got to figure out what they're going to do with Tavares, and they got to figure out where they can upgrade this roster at different places. Maybe at the back end of that forward group, or certainly you know Morgan Riley, for example, he's been someone that has been here from the get go as well. He's under contract to 2030, makes $7.5 million a year. And, I would say that, I don't know if you're going to go deep into the playoffs with him having such a big role on your blue line. So maybe that's an area you look at as well. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there's some things to check into certainly for Tree Living and Company, but I would say the bigger picture is they have a good team here. They have good players. They've just got to kind of put the pieces in order. It's not a situation like we've seen in other places like Buffalo or, some of the teams out west that have been struggling to make it for a long
Yeah.
time. I mean, they have a lot of the pieces here, but they do have to figure out which pieces belong where. And if they have some duplicate pieces, maybe it's time to shuffle them along as well.
Couple more things, very quickly. I want to ask you to speculate on something right now. Let's say they had dusted the Florida Panthers, and whether
Yeah.
it goes seven or whether they would have done it in 4 or 5 had they won that game three, held on and played that game fully. How different is this conversation if they had lost in the next round? And lost, let's say again, didn't get swept, didn't go out in 5, lost in 6 or 7, but they made it to the Eastern Conference final. What conversation are we having, say, 2 weeks from now about this same scenario?
I think it might be the same because
Yeah.
I think there would have been I think that if they would have advanced past Florida and then lost to Carolina in this round, which was completely possible because Carolina has kind of had their number over the years and even more recently, I think that would have been viewed as a major disappointment, beating the Stanley Cup champions in the second round in a 7-game series and then running out of gas and losing to the
Yeah.
Carolina Hurricanes in the Eastern Conference final. I don't know if they would have been viewed that much more favorably. It would have been exciting to see them beat Florida, and there would have been certainly an upswing from that. But as you know, Kyle, we've been doing this now all year, and just think about where the team was after they won the 2 games, where the fan base was, where the feeling was, where the emotion was after they won those first 2 games of the series against Florida, and then
Yeah.
maybe where it was after game 5. That was only 3 short games in between. So I think, yeah, there would have been a huge upswing to beat the Florida Panthers and win that game 7. Everybody would have been thrilled. But I think just as easily, if they would have lost to Carolina in the next round, a team that the fan base probably would feel they should beat, that would have been viewed as a major disappointment as well. So I think we might very well be in the same place.
I actually completely agree with you because the team, I'm going to close on something here, which I'll come back to, but the team had a lot of hope in the fan base and amongst the media and stuff like that for a reason, which we discussed all year long. Regardless of what happened in the last round of the playoffs, this is the best version of this team we have seen in quite some time. But it's easy to, we've pointed out what we think. Certainly, I agree with your statement about an inexperienced coach and an inexperienced GM
Yeah.
being probably his worst move. Let's give him some flowers. What
Yeah.
are one or two of the best moves he made during his time with the Leafs?
Well, certainly drafting, the players that he drafted, and that goes to the scouting staff there. You know, Obviously Matthews number one overall. I think you or I probably could have figured that one out. But in the moment to take Mitch Marner with the pick they took him with, that was not an easy decision. Marner's a smaller forward. There are other players. I'd have to go back and look through that draft list, but there were probably other players they could have selected there. The same can be said for William Nylander. And how about the group coming up with Matthew Nyes in the late second
Mhm.
round? Who's turning out? I think he's going to be a really important player for the Toronto Maple Leafs moving forward. So there were those moves. I think the more recent moves of adding, some like a Chris Tanev to the blue line. I think that's one of those moves. It's, that type of player should have tried to add 6 years ago,
Hmm.
and for whatever reason, they were going down different paths. Now, in his defense and in, the management group's defense there was a COVID epidemic, and the salary cap got extremely tight. It exacerbated the decision they made to go after John Tavares and sign him, because they were thinking probably when they signed Tavares, the cap will continue to go up and we will have some more room to operate in. When that didn't happen, it really did hamstring them. So, getting Tavares, he's a terrific player and he's had a really good run for the Leafs. So I guess you know, it's worked out. He's played well, but the problem in a salary cap era is that they had a lot of resources focused on their forward group and maybe not enough on the blue line. So there were a lot of good things that happened, and the team has been a very good team in the regular season for the last several years. But in the end, this is a league. I always joke it's a one trophy league. People talk about the Hart Trophy,
Yeah,
this trophy.
yeah.
It's a one trophy league. It's the one they give out at the end of the season to the team that wins the last game. And the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't even been able to get a sniff of that over these last, during this era with Brendan Shanahan, running things. So he moves on. The Leafs move on, and some big decisions to be made certainly over the next several days and weeks.
Yeah, I can't remember in league history, or certainly recent history, a team that's felt, or sorry, performed better through a regular season, carried some of that momentum in the playoffs, so they fizzled out, of course, engaging in potentially so many culture and management and roster changes over, because the roster changes that are coming due to salary cap reasons and beyond, they're major. Whether this is clearly a team not rebuilding, but clearly a team reshuffling, and a culture change from top to bottom is what it appears as though we're
Well,
looking at.
I'll give you one quick example, and you don't have to look that far ago. The Florida Panthers had a really good regular season a couple years back. Andrew Burnett replaced Joe Quenneville early in the season. He was a Jack Adams finalist. They won their first round series. In the second round, they got swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning. The general manager, Bill Zito, decided to fire the coach, who was, as I say, a Jack Adams nominee. He hired Paul Maurice. They made major changes to their team when they turned around and traded Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar to get Matthew Tkachuk. That was some pretty major surgery to do on a team that had played so well. That's worked out pretty good for Bill Zito
Not
and the
bad.
Florida Panthers. So, I mean, we will see what happens here in Toronto. I mean, they have pieces. They have players on that team that are very unique and are drivers for that group.
Mhm.
But they haven't been able to put all the pieces together yet. We'll see what Keith Pelly says tomorrow, what Brad Treliving decides to do down the road. Timing is, I mean, again, Florida was fortunate. The timing was perfect. Matthew Tkachuk was looking to force a trade out of Calgary. He was available. They made a big move to get him. We'll
Yeah.
see. Can the Leafs identify a player or two like that and make a big move to get him? We will see.
Yeah, so we'll leave it there because there's still so much. We're going to learn more at the press conference tomorrow. We're going to learn more about the roster changes over the coming weeks and months, and we'll be right back here to discuss them. But obviously, the Shanahan move happened just hours after we did a conversation this morning about it.
Yeah.
Before we go off air, I do want to thank a few people. I want to thank Big Z, Alex, producer Tim, and of course our boy Monzo for whipping this
Yes.
together. We threw this together in 25 minutes, ready to go. Everyone worked really hard, and we appreciate all of you.
Yep.
We just sit in front of the camera and talk, but the real work's being done behind the scenes, and that's what you get on the Toronto Sports Rush Network. So if you're not already subscribed, please do so. Please like this
Yep.
video, leave us comments. We love that, and we will have as many live reactions as the news warrants in the coming
Yep.
weeks and months. On behalf of Toronto Sports Rush by the Brett Rivers Network, my name is Kyle Andrew. I was joined once again by lead NHL Network analyst Mr. EJ Hradek. We'll see you soon in the very near future.